Sutherland, Sarah Werner, and I'd like to also invite the Assistant Attorney General to introduce himself.
Good afternoon. This is Brian Urenkar with the Attorney General's Office.
All right. Thank you so much. So moving on to agenda item number 1, it is nominating a subcommittee chair. I will continue to chair today's meeting, but moving forward, the subcommittee chair after today will chair all future meetings of the subcommittee. The subcommittee chair will work with DPS staff and myself to administer and set meetings, as well as work with staff on agenda items and materials for the board around the work in this subcommittee. With that, I would like to call for nominations for the chair of this subcommittee. Are there any nominations to be considered?
Yeah, it's Will Dunn. Because I've been doing type 2 board work at CDPHE for the last decade. I'm comfortable running a meeting. So I'm willing to offer my services as long as you don't abuse me in between meetings.
All right. Is anyone else interested?
To nominate Will Dunn to chair.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Is there a second?
Second, Dr. Estes.
All right. I'd like to call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. Will Dunn is the chair of the Harm Reduction and Public Safety Subcommittee. So I'd like to move on to agenda item number 2, which is review of the topic questions and determination of what, if any, questions should be added. We have provided these questions that need to be expanded upon, reviewed, and answered. These are questions that the executive director needs to be answered for the agency. We have also provided Billy Wynn's subcommittee scope of work, provided at the first meeting in an updated format with questions formatted for each particular subcommittee that was adopted. We would like for you to review and discuss these questions today, add additional questions, and working on answering them as best as you can. We will review the questions in the following meeting, and you will discuss the questions based on priority at the next meeting. We want to adopt these questions as the work moves forward, and I'm certain, as is the nature of the work, we will have more questions to answer and review. We want to leave today's meeting with these questions and for you to review them in the coming weeks. So let's now open the floor for discussion. But before that, I'll go over them very briefly, and then we'll open it up fully for discussion. So harm reduction, public safety. What are the primary trusted research resources related to the efficacy of psilocybin, including harm reduction? What is the appropriate time frame between sessions? What disclosures of regulation should be provided to the participants so they understand their rights under the law? What are the record-keeping responsibilities of the healing centers, including as it relates to third-party accessibility? What labeling should be provided to the participant to know the dosage and other needed disclosures? What other health and safety warnings must be provided to participants before psilocybin is administered? What enforcement mechanisms should be in place to ensure participant safety is ensured? What education should be provided to facilitators as it relates to harm reduction and public safety, and who is this area's core audience, and what is the core messaging? So I'd like to open this for discussion. Any additional questions we want to add in here? Just open it up. Oh, Tina.
Sorry, I didn't know if
Dr.
you wanted us to
Gonzalez?
just jump in.
No, sorry, I can't see the hands, so I was trying to scroll through.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it kind of matches my background. Just a clarifying question on what labeling should be provided to participants on dosage and other needed. I might be confused, but isn't that still in question as what dosing or what dosage should be given? Because there's still in research.
That's still I think they'll play into each other.
So should we re-verbiage that question?
Yeah, let's do it.
And I don't know if I'd be the correct person to help with that, or could that be put under the research, the trusted research?
Yeah.
As a bullet?
Yeah, let me just adjust that on my document. Okay. Will?
I sort of worry about that I'm not a subject matter expert in anything that's psilocybin related. I probably have worn out my welcome by saying that. It almost seems like I would rather that, well, that's probably too strong of a term. I'm wondering if there isn't some way of soliciting sort of expert opinion about this. You know, what I would feel more comfortable if somebody were to say, you know, here's what the sort of the recommendation, you know, for dose, for instance. I know nothing about that, but I do understand messaging. I do understand protocols as they relate to medicine. Are we going to have the opportunity to solicit expert advice or expert? Okay, so that answers the question. I mean, I'm fine with these questions in general, but I don't have the expertise to answer them, and I don't know that. And I appreciate that there may be experts on this particular committee or on the board as a whole that may, but it seems like if we're trying to come up with all of these answers, these meetings are going to go on. We would have to schedule like these meetings to last for days.
Yeah.
And it feels like there may be a more efficient way of doing it. Thank you for my time.
Yeah, no worries. I think you're spot on. I mean, the main focus for today's meeting is to identify, you know, what these questions, frame them differently, and then also add additional questions as related to harm reduction specifically in this space and public safety in this specific space as well. And we will be able to solicit expert advice on these topics as well. Sheriff Lucero.
Yeah, I guess, Sam, so a couple things. One is, where are these questions located at on our state account? Are they in the file section of the Google Drive, or so we can access
They should be. Kathy Duran in your Gmail sent out a full board packet about a week or two ago prior. So it'd be almost 2 weeks ago with a full list of all the questions for the subcommittees. Billy Wynn's packet as well from the first full board meeting, and then an updated format of questions as pertaining to the related subcommittees that he had drafted based off of the proposition.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess my second one would be, what is the process to solicit those expert opinions? For either from a medical doctor or somebody that has done, because identifying who a trusted research resource is, that's kind of interesting because it's a new field, right?
Yeah, I mean, related to research materials, it's, you know, academic papers, other materials from nonprofits or other associations that have kind of done this work. And we do have some research materials compiled, and we will send those out. But specifically, trusted research and related solicitation of folks we can bring in once we get to the second phase of the subcommittee work, which will probably be in about 2 weeks. Bring in some experts to come in and discuss some of these topics as related to harm reduction and public safety. Will?
So I did look through that packet that Mr. Ann had offered. It embedded in it is a bunch of what looks like garbles, or I don't know how to describe it. I can't tell if the garbles that are in there replaced content that we need to read, or if that's just I don't know how it got embedded into the document.
Hmm.
A request from me is that if somebody could just take a quick look and run through those and make sure that what's being attached is intended to be attached, and if there is 9 pages of spaces and ASCII characters, that those sort of again, I sound like a broken record, but I really would like to be as efficient as possible with these, and having to sort through a bunch of trash that's with the document is I could gain some time back there if staff could just make sure that what's attached is all germane. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, we can do that. And we can put up the main bulk of the questions. I just separated them out of the document and put it into a PDF for Amanda, and as related to this specific subcommittee. We can pull up Billy Wynn's pieces as well, but we can look at the packet again and see what you were at.
If just a quick reminder, if somebody is attaching something, that they may maybe just quickly proof it and make sure that it's what all the content that's in there is what's intended. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll take a look at it. Sheriff Lucero.
I too don't want to sound like a broken record, but I did find some questions in the packet. It looks like they're agendas, though. Is that what everybody else is seeing? They're under the agendas, and the latest agenda I have is dated 4/27 of 2023 on an email from Kathy.
Yes, so that was the agenda for this specific meeting. The board packet went out 2 weeks ago from Kathy with the questions to address, as well as Billy Wynn's 2 pieces of questions to address that we could add in to this specific meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Will.
Do we know, are there, I guess part of this is because it's so novel. There probably aren't sort of similar templates that Dora uses for other types of treatment like this. I guess that would be the other thing that comes to mind as we look at these questions. It might be handy if there's some consistency, or, psilocybin might be pretty far out there, but it feels like if there are treatment facilities that are using, for instance, ketamine, and there are some similarities in whatever record-keeping responsibilities or disclosures that are required by DORA there, that might be a starting place on for us to know what might work with psilocybin. Thank you for the time.
Okay. Commissioner, you had your hand up first.
I do have a question, and I'm putting on my commissioner hat here and coming from a meeting this morning that we had a huge discussion on the healing centers and the responsibilities of record keeping and stuff on these centers. Because there's actually going to be a part of this that a 12 by 12, you can grow your own at home. What part are we going to regulate on these healing centers, being able to make sure that these are responsible grows at home, as well as they're under the direction of somebody that has knowledge of these, and we don't just have them end up on the streets.
Are you referring to the Senate bill?
Yes, Senate Bill 280, because I see some of this language, and we've got 2 different things going on here, and harm reduction, I completely understand since I've worked the opioid side of it. But I want to make sure that we have regulations because of working the opioid side of it. I want to make sure that we're putting parameters so we don't end up in a situation like the opioids.
Right. And so at the moment, we are going to hold these meetings until the bill passes, or if it doesn't. But Brian and I have spoken about this, and I think that it would be best if we provide you with an analysis on what the purview of the board is in relation. Brian.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that, I mean, the task of the board is to implement the law as it is currently. And so currently the law is 12-170-105. That's what the advisory board's there to do. The reason why you have myself and Ashley from my office is when the law changes, we're here to advise you on it, and we'll keep you up to date as much as possible. Much like earlier on in these meetings, we had a training kind of what the Natural Medicine Health Act is. We plan on doing something like that, I'm sure, at some point if the bill does change. But if you're interested in following what's happening with the bill for your own personal reasons, feel free. But as far as it, like when it comes to these meetings, until the law is the law, you just got to focus on what's here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Estes, Dr. Gonzalez, you had your hand up first. Apologies.
Sorry. So back to the questions. Sorry.
Thank you.
Yes. And is it, it might be, for me, the first question I tried to look at is the last one. Who is the core audience? Because then that's going to help answer the rest of the questions, or actually frame them. And then what's the core messaging also ties back to who the audience is. And I think the commissioner kind of pointed on something that was also my brain, the medication assisted treatment. So like the Vivitrol, the methadone, the Suboxone, there's specific legislation that kind of carries with that, and kind of impacts no matter what environment the individual is in. So if they're in the community on those medications, then they end up in a county jail. The jail has to keep them on those medications. And if they're sentenced to prison, then the prison has to do it. And then when they get out, they come my way with state Medicaid. And so in there's a lot of audiences that I just kind of hit just with one kind of path that could go down. So I'm wondering if those should go first. And then once we kind of figure out who our core audience is going to be and what messaging, it might help kind of put the other ones into retrospect.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Estes.
Thank you. I love seeing all your faces. You're so animated on the, so beautiful. Yeah. I want to say that Mr. Dunn and Sheriff Lucero are talking about that there's a learning curve here, which is true, and it's quite steep because it's not only about many different layers, like a layer cake, there was like 29 layers to it, but also it's a new, and so learning all of that, learning to know what each medicine, for instance, is about, just takes some time, and I just would reassure that we're all learning. I am. Going back to the topic, which is harm reduction and public safety, I'd like to say this. In my experience of 13 years as chair on the Colorado State Grievance Board, I should say 13 years on the board and a few years as the chair, there are already some things that are in place. For instance, in terms of harm reduction and public safety, people are required in the helping professions, licensed and registered in the state of Colorado, to present the brand new patient with a document that says several things about ethics, including that never is it all right for a sexual relationship to take place between the practitioner and the patient. And that if so, or if there is something going off the rails, the name, address, contact number of Dora is right there in full view. That is given to each patient at the very beginning, and I cannot see why that would not be appropriate here. Secondly, in terms of public safety, it's traditional through all our professions. I'm a psychoanalyst for many years now, several decades. Doing an intake is creating a record. An intake is paper on pencil. It's an interview with the patient, finding out not only how they are, where they are now, what the issue is, pencil matters are, what their goal is, but also their family history and other details. That should be in there too, because it's not only for the safety of the patient, but the helper has a very deep and broad idea of who this individual is, because they're not one to speak up. But also, if something comes to bear, such as a child custody lawsuit, and a helper's records are subpoenaed by the court, confidentiality might not hold at that time. The court might have a higher order for that, in which case having records is very important also for the helping professional. So there's that. The third thing is that I believe in that disclosure. I'm not sure. I believe that there's also a clause about confidentiality. There's a clause about dual relationships, or at least there used to be, that there should be no dual relationships. I spoke yesterday about that in the rural areas, you're going to find it hard that people don't know each other. That would dual relationship means they know each other, they might go to social gatherings or church with each other or whatever. So that needs to be looked at carefully about how to parse that, so that all the folks in our rural areas, like San Luis Valley, for instance, everybody is a primo, everybody is a cousin to everyone else. So, and the last part has to do with finances. The ethics of finances, that there will be no pre-billing, post-billing, deceit in billing, if there is insurance, for instance, or if there is a third party who's helping to pay for this person's treatment, then that has to be handled ethically. So those are some of the things I know about. In terms of how much other safety warnings or so forth, I agree with Mr. Dunn and with Sheriff that we need people who actually do this on a regular basis to let us know what the parameters are. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff Lucero.
I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit to that fifth bullet point on there, and just something that stands out to me, that a question that I think we need to add to this list, as far as what labeling should be provided to the participant to know the dosage and other needed disclosures. I would like to add something along the lines of what labeling and packaging. How is this product going to be packaged? I go back to legalization of marijuana and some of the things that we saw, they were putting gummies that looked just like gummies into standardized gummy bags. And it wasn't clearly marked. It would confuse kids. Kids would come into the contact with that, and we'd have an overdose, or a child that ingested some THC. So I think we should also include packaging and clear labeling to that list.
Thank you. I'll add that in there. Commissioner?
When you are talking about clear labeling, I know that they did it there was something on the actual product as well. Is this something that we can actually do onto the product to make sure that it's people know what they have in their hands?
Commissioner, that's exactly what I was getting at. So it's very clear. There's no doubt what they're in possession of.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to add to what was just being discussed, when that eventual tweak was made in the state's marijuana regulations, it was ultimately about making sure that the substance, the gummy, whatever it might have been, was readily identifiable outside of its packaging. So I think that is definitely something that we should be discussing in these meetings. So I guess that ultimately is labeling, packaging, and almost form factor.
Sam, I don't know if you see my hand
Sorry.
raised.
Yeah. Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, go ahead.
So I think that the other thing just to remember is that certainly with the EMS agencies in which I work around, that is a common thing where there is either an unintentional ingestion or an overdose because the packaging isn't clear. I think this feels different for me because I think psilocybin is still going to be a Schedule 1 medication and is going to probably be, I'm guessing, held to federal labeling requirements. And I think that, not to say that I'm reassured, but I think this is a different space because this is just going to be in therapeutic areas. And at least my understanding, not available from like over the counter or retail things. So I think that there's probably something already in place for that because it's a different mode of distribution. Thank you for my time.
Thank you. Tina, you had your hand raised.
No, I was going to ask the same question if this was going to stay as a Scheduled 1 drug or if it would be labeled as a Schedule 3. But I think he will answer the question for me.
My understanding is it's a Schedule 1, and since that's a federal classification, I don't think the state can necessarily change that to a Schedule 3. The storage and accounting requirements are just between a Schedule 2 and a Schedule 3 are fairly different. I'm guessing that Schedule 2 is fairly stringent. I'm guessing Schedule 1 is going to be as tight as it gets. And I'm at the very fringe of my knowledge of that. Thank you for my time.
Brian.
Yeah, it's Schedule 1. So is marijuana, but and that's an issue for the DEA. So the DEA does scheduling. I think there's a bill, at least there's a proposed bill floating around in federal Congress to remove psilocybin from Schedule 1. But that's just a proposed bill.
Would that impact packaging? Would there be specific guidelines around packaging with the schedule?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
So Brian, that bill that is going through the legislation right now, we can talk about it afterwards because it doesn't necessarily go with what federal regulations are, correct?
Once the bill's passed into law, yes, we can talk about it. I don't know if that answers your question, but part of it's also an exercise in maintaining your own sanity because who knows what the bill's going to look like when it actually gets voted on. So.
Okay, I just had that question. Okay, thank you. That's just my world, so sorry.
I did just want to contribute some news that came out in the middle of last year, just to make sure that all of us on the subcommittee are up to date. The Intercept did report last July that the Biden administration, specifically the Department of HHS, Health and Human Services, they are anticipating FDA approval of psilocybin and MDMA within the next 2 years, they were saying, and this was 6-9 months ago, for designated breakthrough therapies for certain conditions. So I think, coupled with the existing scheduling, Schedule 1, but also looking forward to a potential federally legal pathway for psilocybin specifically, I think lots will change. In the time that we're having these conversations, in the time that we're working toward a regulated environment for Colorado, I did just want to point that out. And also to what Brian was just pointing out, the same Biden administration, Department of HHS, as well as Attorney General Merrick Garland are currently undergoing an assessment of cannabis's current scheduling, because of course that remains a Schedule 1 substance. And there is a high likelihood, in my at least professional opinion, that we will see a rescheduling, descheduling of cannabis throughout the next year, but we will see. But just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that, and I'm happy to share that journalism with folks if that's helpful.
Yeah, you can send that to me. You can send me that email. Be great. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Gonzalez.
Sorry, and I should know this. Was there a physical note attached to this law where there's funding to provide education to providers? Does anyone know?
Well, give Brian a moment.
Off the top of my head, I don't know. I mean, I know it's a cash funded program, so the licensing fees have to fund itself. And I believe there's like an advance from the General Assembly to get the program started, because obviously you don't have licensing fees. But beyond that, I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay. Because just to kind of answer some of these questions, or to kind of build some action items for them. I think building the education, once we kind of answer who the core audience is, and then kind of start answering what does that education look like, because it's going to differ for each audience that you have, depending on kind of where they're at in the community. So I was just curious if there was funding, or if that was something that the communities were going to have to do for themselves. And then just another one too, the health and safety warnings. And I don't know this, I'm not a medical doctor. So I don't know if this drug interacts with any of the other ones, or if that's something that you have to push to the DEA to ask them for guidance or clarity, but that might also go back to the labeling for participants. But as a form of public safety, harm reduction.
Dr. Estes.
Yes, thank you. I was thinking about that when we have testimony from people in helping professions, maybe we could also have some testimony from people who would very much like to avail themselves.
Dr. Estes, I apologize. I don't know if anyone can. I think your audio is coming in just slightly muddled.
Sorry. How am I now? And is
That
that
does sound clear.
Okay, let me start over then. I'm thinking that when we have people come in who are medical professionals, practice in these matters, it would be good if we also had people who are seeking treatment. From them, what would they like to have? And questions. For instance, I've been thinking about, like, if I were going to do this, which I have no intention of doing at this time, but if I were doing, my children are in their 50s, my grandchildren are in their 20s. If they were going to avail themselves to this particular medicine treatment, what would I want to have in place for my children, my grandchildren, and myself? And one of the things that keeps coming to mind is I want experience. I don't want people coming right out of their training and whatever it is who have never ever sat with patients before. We don't know the cost to the therapist. We don't know how to regulate and balance their own work in the helping professions, who don't know about burnout. We don't know about what it takes out of your own neurology to sit with people deeply, and also to, in a sense, as any compassionate person is, worried about that. Worry, hope, pray, all the things that we do when we work with people. So I'm hoping that, but possibly we could think about, well, what if we were going to do? Well, what would we want to see in place for ourselves and our families too? Because that flows out to all other people we care about in the community and the larger world. So just my 2 cents worth.
Thank you. Any other additional questions that may relate to harm reduction or public safety? Or Riccardo, I think you're on mute.
Oh yeah.
Apologize.
Sorry, I was legitimately talking to myself there. I think one thing I'd like to see represented here is an intention for a training curriculum for various stakeholders, especially as it relates to harm reduction, very much including facilitators, law enforcement.
Yeah, and that could be a piece that's added into the qualifications, licensing, and training piece of that subcommittee, but also this subcommittee as it pertains to EMS and law enforcement. I don't know if Will wants to expand on your perspective on if that makes sense.
I'm not sure I understood what the question was. Could you reframe it?
Happily, Will. Yeah, just wondering, is it our subcommittee or the other one that Sam mentioned to talk about training for law enforcement, especially as it relates to harm reduction?
So thank you, Mr. Baca. That feels like that belongs here. I would also probably defer to Sheriff Lucero. However, I think that when you see emergency services, when it comes to things like this, paramedics and law enforcement, there are areas where we do train together. This probably would be one of them.
Yeah, I think it's probably appropriate here, but I could see a crossover to another subcommittee as well. I don't think it should be narrowly focused just on law enforcement. I think it should also be first responders as well.
Yeah, and that could be that. They could also. I know we have some folks also on from emergency response safety and ethics, and that I mean I think that ties in to each other there on training standards for emergency response, whether it's law enforcement or EMS.
Well, I think there should also be the education piece on what harm reduction is, right? I think that's a question. Riccardo, maybe that's where maybe I'm hearing you wrong, but I think the education on to law enforcement and first responders on what this looks like for harm reduction and the impacts to public safety am I off base?
Oh, yeah, Sheriff Lucero, I think it definitely includes that, but it wouldn't be limited toward that. I think from my perspective, I just want to make sure that we are going to that definition of harm reduction to make sure that we are reducing the negative consequences around substance use. And I think a big part of that is education.
And when you're talking about first responders, please do not forget about human services workers, the caseworkers that are on child protection, because they are a lot of times the first responders that are there and stuff like that. So when you're training law enforcement, please remember them also.
Add that in there. Dr. Estes.
Speaking of first responders, as a post-trauma recovery specialist now for 15 years, with disaster sites such as places of slaughter, Columbine, there for 3 years, such as 9/11 survivor families, of which there were 160 in California because the planes were flying there that day. In terms of earthquakes, especially starting in '88, the Armenian earthquake, my experience is that the training of first responders is spotty, that some are very well trained in many, and even you might say all aspects of what to do, but particularly what not to do once people have been taken out of their immediate peril. And so I'm wondering if a question would be good to say, what training would we like to have first responders have with regard to all these matters, particularly with regard to psilocybin overdose, for instance, or illness that comes about as a result. Thank you.
Thank you. Well,
Thank you, Dr. Estes. I appreciate that. I do feel like, again, there's probably two phases of education. One is to probably just either the general public or the general healthcare public. So if somebody goes into their physician's office and says, I've been using psilocybin to treat whatever, that there's at least that's not new to a medical provider. But I think you're right in the sense of a crisis. That's a different thing. Forgive me, I don't want to make this pejorative. Through my career, I try to always make sure that crews are trained to handle anything at 2 o'clock in the morning because there's nobody around that's going to be able to help them with that. So at the 2 o'clock crisis, 2 a.m. crisis, the paramedics or the police officers or the caseworkers, whoever that might be, that may be asked to intervene in that crisis should be trained well to be able to handle that in a safe and compassionate manner. That's what I would like to see. And again, I see it as sort of two different things, a broad sort of educational awareness and one for when intervening in a crisis. Thank you for the time.
you said intervening in a crisis, and what was the last piece you just said?
I guess I conceptualize it as that there's general training that anybody who's in healthcare should be aware of psilocybin and how it's how it affects people and just so they've got just a base knowledge of that. I think that's just good healthcare. I think that there is a second version of that's an emergency, and where emergency services are being activated for a particular situation. I walked in last night onto some of my peers that were already talking about psilocybin and being called to some scenes where psilocybin was being used. It wasn't used or being regulated in a way that was necessarily from a regulated standpoint, but it was definitely being used in some sort of medicinal way. So my goal is that any law enforcement officer or paramedic or anybody from emergency services that's being asked to intervene in a time of real or perceived crisis, that they're doing it in a knowledgeable and compassionate way.
Thank you.
And Sheriff Lucero, I forgive me if you find me speaking on behalf of law enforcement. I'm probably trying to speak in emergency services in general, and please interrupt me if at some point I'm saying something that does not comport with law enforcement or with your expertise. Thank you.
No, I actually had my hand up because my response was going to be as well, a bifurcated two-pronged response. So I think we're on the same page.
That's convenient for me. Thank you, Sheriff.
All right. Any additional questions? If you have any, let's add some now, and then before the next meeting, take a look at this and see if you need it. If anything else comes up that you'd like to add in here as we review them again at the second meeting. Dr. Estes?
The primary trusted research resources, we have talked about those at other subcommittees, such as Johns Hopkins Research, University of Colorado, Stanford, Harvard. The research on psilocybin and other substances has been going on for decades. Some of it on the QT, you might say, and it has not had a lot of publicity, but it is there. So we'll be adding to those from what I am understanding everyone to say. The public time between sessions and dosage and so forth, as Mr. Dunn talked about and other people talked about, we're going to ask people to come and testify or witness to us to teach us about what those are. The record keeping responsibilities we're going to give, as I understand it. I'm just trying. It would be so helpful to me if these were numbered rather than bulleted.
Yeah, I'll make sure to send it out with numbers next time.
Trying to figure out what it is. Okay, so we're gonna talk about ways of protecting the public safety for the public with regard to record keeping, but also protecting, in a sense, the healthcare professionals so they have a good record, a good, clear record of what they have done and also what they have not done. The labeling that people brought up seems so important. The anecdote that you told about the gummies is just like heart clutching. And then we're going to, I'm just trying to understand this for me. The enforcement mechanisms should be in place to ensure participant safety. I'm not clear about that. Is that DORA and law enforcement, or is that just DORA? What in be in place to ensure participants?
When you're breaking in and out, but when you're back to your question on enforcement of safety mechanisms regarding the recommendations that you propose, the recommendations will be proposed to DORA and then to the whole of the state from there.
Right.
As I understand that.
Appears to be, the administration of and the people coming to gain this kind of help. It seems that the clientele or the catchment area is self-selecting. I don't know if I can figure out exactly who, because it could be anyone. And a lot of it depends not only on accessibility of a clinic near people. So if they have little children, for instance, paraben underwear that they can actually get to, but also the amount of money. I'm hearing wild amounts of money for treatment, in the thousands of dollars per treatment, and I have a great concern about that. But in terms of accessibility being part of safety, I think that's really cool, because a lot of people have families, and they need to secure the safety of family. If they can go to the clinic and they can go receive.
Thank you. Brian.
Yeah, just to dovetail off of Dr. Estes' question there. So there's going to always be dual enforcement, right? So like if somebody does something that's against the rules of conduct for a facilitator, then obviously they could be subject to disciplined via DORA, but then, if there's many times where you're going to commit some sort of unprofessional conduct that could also be a criminal violation, then obviously law enforcement would get involved. So like an example from one of my other clients, if you have like a physician who has an inappropriate sexual contact with a patient, that could both be disciplined under DORA from the medical board, and obviously the law enforcement's going to get involved in that circumstance. So the answer would be both. But I also had one point that I want to add for questions to possibly address. This isn't like necessarily required by the statute, but I haven't seen it across any other subcommittee, and this seems like an appropriate one for it. The bounds of appropriate physical contact during facilitation, as well as what's consent, what does consent look like, and the ability to withdraw consent to physical contact, I think is something somebody needs to talk about, and this would probably be a good one for that.
Thanks, Brian. Sheriff.
Yeah, either under this one or the ethics subcommittee. I believe it kind of alluded to that under the ethics when I sat in on some of that as well. So I think under either.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Gonzalez.
Can I, and I don't know if this is time for this question, kind of a lot, kind of not next steps, but our next meetings. So I'm not participating as much as I was on the other ones, because I think we addressed a lot of these questions in some of the other ones, and some of the work that I think we have in some of the other subcommittees, it's going to funnel through each other. And if it works cohesively, and you're not running around trying to herd cats to try to figure out, okay, let's put this all together in one recommendation to the director. So when we regroup and we start answering questions, is that when we're going to decide which is the appropriate one for each subcommittee to take on to start answering? And we're going to condense them.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's right in line with the idea. I think right now, we're the way we perceive it, we're in phase one, right? Identifying the scope of work, identifying the key core questions that need to be addressed first in priority. So the idea is when you meet in 2 weeks from this meeting, based off of these questions that I compile and then send out, and it'll be on the agenda that's for the public as well, with the public link where they can see the agenda. It's going to be the same questions in a numerical format that we discuss, you all discuss and say, what is priority number one, right? What is priority number one for harm reduction and public safety? And then the second part of that meeting would be specifically discussing that in length, and then we'll send resources prior to that meeting on some of these topics. And then 2 weeks after that meeting would be going into core questions, and then potentially identifying some experts to come in and be able to support and provide some answers, and maybe do a presentation around some of the questions that you may have pertaining to, like, say, the first few questions that you're trying to directly address that will set you on the path forward.
And so when you say all of this great stuff, and what I haven't heard in any of the committees, and maybe I'm getting ahead of us, but the written recommendations, whose responsibility is that? Is that yours? Are you taking
yes,
everything that you're learning and taking it back?
Yeah, Dora will be doing draft rulemaking.
I'm taking my own notes, but I'm no means to share with anyone.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that I'm not missing something.
No, and please feel free to share them with me. Send them my way. I'm happy to add them in. Cool.
So I think her question might have been specific to the annual report, Dr. or Mrs. Gonzalez. Is that correct?
So both. So the recommendations that we give for the September report, I didn't know if you were going to assign that to someone to kind of draft everything that was being discussed, and then we're sending it to a central person who puts them all together into a readable document. And so I wanted to make sure that I wasn't supposed to be keeping notes that were legible for anyone else but myself.
Yeah. So we will be doing the rulemaking and then sending it based off of what happens in the meetings, and then reviewed for you, and then back and forth till we have a draft that you guys finalize, and then we'll send out. Great.
A question for Sam and Brian and anybody else, but just thinking about harm reduction, and I'm not sure if it belongs here or in another subcommittee. Thinking about testing for the eventual products that will be available for use in these facilities. Obviously important, but I'm guessing it's probably not here. It's probably elsewhere. Just wanted to make sure it was being covered.
Yeah, so that would be products research and data, would be testing, cultivation standards as well, and the specific product, or in terms the species of psilocybin. I hope that answered your question.
It did. Thank you.
Great. All right. Any additional questions around harm reduction, public safety, or any of the pieces? Okay. Well, Dr. Estes.
What we often heard from people who had been grieved against on the Colorado State Grievance Board was that they didn't know the law. We implemented a jurisprudence requirement for the registered psychotherapist, for instance. And I believe it may have also added the licensed people also. That went a long way toward people being informed. Sometimes when you send people emails or you send them snail mail, they don't open it. And you're giving them critical information. And it could even say urgent in the subject line. And they might not open it anyway. But when they take a jurisprudence workshop that is run by a lawyer, then they attend a class and they take a test. It's a little tiny test. It's not, it's not monstrous, but it does ask people this key point of what they learned that is within CIS regulated statutes. And I think I would ask that question. How will you disseminate this review? What guidelines, rules, laws, policy are to the people who will be doing this work? So if they are ever called up about whatever, that they are not uninformed, they'll take a little coursework. I think that coursework was possibly 3 periods of 1 day. It was at that time pre-pandemic in person. So thank you.
All right, thank you. On that. Right. Any other additional pieces? Okay. If there's no further discussion, we can move to the third agenda item, adoption of a future schedule. So this future schedule is based on the push-pull of everyone's schedule availability when submitted. We want to adopt this particular schedule to ensure there are no conflicting meetings with other subcommittees for the coming weeks. As I have them currently, based off of a 2-week cadence from each meeting, the next meetings for the harm reduction in public safety subcommittee would be May 12th at 1, May 26th at 1, and June 9th at 1. Again, that's May 12th at 1, May 26th at 1, June 9th at 1. Tina?
is the 26th is a federal holiday for us. And so I
Okay.
don't know if it is for the state.
Let's see.
I thought that was a Monday instead and
So
a Friday.
it is. So my organization, we do it on a Friday. So I just want to make sure it doesn't interfere. I can still be on.
Okay.
I'm just wanting to make sure that it doesn't interfere with anyone else's.
Yeah, I have a Monday
Okay.
as the holiday.
So I guess my employer is cooler that we get the whole 4-day weekend. Just kidding. I'll shut up. Yeah, take that, state of Colorado. Just kidding.
Oh man.
And Sam, just an FYI, I don't know that I will be available on the 26th. Just FYI, but the other dates work well.
Okay. So just for now, can I have a motion to adopt the future schedule as May 12th, May 26th, and June 9th at 1?
So moved.
So moved. Second, Will Dunn.
Thank you. I'd like to call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. So the schedule for the Harm Reduction Public Safety Subcommittee is now adopted for May 12th at 1, May 26th at 1, and June 9th at 1. And then let's move to the next piece real quick.
Sam, you'll send us out invites for those for our calendars, correct?
Yes, absolutely. So move to closing the meeting. I'd like to thank everyone for your attendance and participation during today's meeting. Before we adjourn, few items. I mean, the next meeting will be held on May 12th at 1. Please remember that your attendance is necessary to ensure a quorum for the meeting. I'd like to move to attestations. Do you attest and affirm that all conflicts of interest have been disclosed and that confidentiality of all board members has been maintained since the previous board meeting? I'll start with Will Dunn.
I affirm.
Dr. Tina Gonzalez.
Yes.
Dr. Estes. Sheriff Lucero.
I affirm.
Commissioner Wendy Buxton-Andrade.
I affirm.
Riccardo Baca.
I affirm.
Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Seconded.
All right. I'd like to call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. With that, the meeting of the Natural Medicine Advisory Board Subcommittee on Harm Reduction in Public Safety has adjourned. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for your time.
Mr. Barami, you have done an excellent job. Tina, I appreciate your attention to detail. Man, you're Johnny on the spot. Dios te bendiga means may God bless you in Spanish, but it carries more than that. It also carries the idea that may you be watched over and guided until we see you again. So Dios te bendiga y adios.
Thank you, Dr. Estes. Talk to you soon.
See you, everybody. Thank you.